Greetings, greetings, greetings.
This is my tribute to the spirit of Salvador Dali. Dali was the most flamboyant of poseurs, the most exhibited of exhibitionists. I am surrealism, he legitimately claimed.
The only difference between one crazy man and Dali is very simple. Dali is not crazy at all.
Inspired by all kinds of sexual activity, all human genitals, by belches and the emptying of bowels, he shared all our demons, and he haunts us still. All his friends were fleeting, and most of his friendships shallow, but I fancy that mine, for several summers in Spain nearly 40 years ago, was deeper and more mutually confessional. I was in Caracas by chance, seeking an unpretentious, friendly place in which to take an autumn holiday, to swim, eat, read, do nothing. In 1968, it was just that kind of Catalan coastal village. No crowds, no fashionable shops, no smart hotels. Sand edged the deep bay, wild rocks enclosed it, and some welcoming spirit whispered, "This is it." Within hours, I had been adopted by 2 beach dogs. I called them Scipio and Hannibal. It was they who got me from my bed each morning, and with them at my heels I walked the length of what passed for the main street to the butcher's shop. Every day he found something unspeakable to feed them. And that is how I encountered Salvador Dali. One particular morning, the butcher gave me the windpipe and lungs of some wretched animal, complete, intact, and very bloody. And there it was, staining the wooden cafe table and my hands, the dog slavering at my knees as I sliced it for them. I was scarcely conscious of the great pre-war Cadillac as it whispered to a stop, and took no notice of the 2 people who had got out of it. They sat in the sun a little way away and watched. Then the man came over. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his attitude imperious. "Of course, you're Dali," I replied. At the time, I knew no more of Dali than any other reasonably educated man interested in art. Dali did not have the stature of Braque and Picasso, but I thought him far the most accomplished of all the surrealist painters, a man with so refined a technique that a dozen celebrated Italian Renaissance painters might have envied him. I knew of the sofa in the shape of Mae West's lips, and of the lobster telephone. I knew of his vocabulary of phallic human forms, melting watches and fried eggs. I knew of the obscurity of titles that he used, the spectre of sex appeal, soft construction with boiled beans, and, above all, the great masturbator, from which, with little understanding, I had taken great comfort on my own discovery of that, at my school, rarely solitary vice. But I also knew his reputation as a man who, very publicly, never hesitated to play the flamboyant fool, a man who painted an unconscious masterpiece in the morning.
Today start again and probably miraculously achieve one masterpiece in the 3 or 4 next hours of time.
But could do nothing in the evening without drama or farce.
Butterfly.
Shock and surprise were everything to him. To this day, I do not know whether he was flattered that I knew who he was, or disappointed that he had been denied another opportunity to announce to all in earshot, "I am Dali, "And you've been waiting for me," Dali said, half question, half accusation, and seemed surprised when I said that I had not. The encounter ended with an invitation to his house that evening, but when I asked for the address, I was given no more than a wave to the east. And to the east it was, at Portly Gut. A servant opened the door. The house leaned into the cliffside, climbing. A few steps here, a wayward passage there, with glimpses into rooms and, through windows, repeated views of another, more complex bay. The twists and turns of the house mirror the erratic complexities of Dali's mind, the unexpected intrusion, the fortuitous banality, the paradox of high intelligence, and quite appalling taste. As we emerged onto a terrace, Dali seemed to be lurking at the door. Dali, at the end of the 60s, was perhaps not quite 6 feet in height. At 64, he had begun to stoop a little, and, conscious of it, had the habit of often straightening his spine, squaring his shoulders, and puffing out his chest. His hair was thinning, receding, and I think dyed, for there was no hint of grey or white. It was by no means fastidiously clean. At Portly Gut, not putting on the style, he took to 60s jackets that were either marginally ethnic or operatic uniform, with cotton trousers and white shirts of loose Byronic elegance. His face had sagged enough to blur the once emphatic line of his chin. Only the moustache, with its ridiculous waxed spikes, remained as vigorous as in his prime. The moustache was, I think, important as some sort of illusory monument to an equally delusory virility. He could still widen his eyes to show a startling white around the iris. "What shall I call you?" I asked, thinking more impertinent and Dali even worse. "What would you like to call me?" "Majesty," I suggested, with a slight lift to the last syllable. And Majesty it occasionally was, but only to remind him of the joke. He ushered me to a giant eggshell, broken open as though boiled for breakfast, and indicated that I should duck through a low hatch and sit inside. Of these there were 3. His wife and muse, Gala, the woman I had earlier seen accompanying him, was already installed in one. Dali ducked into the 3rd, and there we sat, at such a distance as to make conversation difficult. From mine, in the middle, I had to lob prattle over the jagged serrations of white cement at either Gala or Dali, knowing that the other could not hear it. Gala never responded. At that stage, I did not know that she was deaf. I just thought her staring straight ahead, never uttering a word, a stratagem to make me go. Never had I been more uncomfortable. Dali at last said, "Let me show you my Christ." Scrambling out of our respective eggs, we set off, not back into the house to see a painting, as I expected, but away from it, past garden ornaments so kitsch that not even the nouveau riche of Billericay would have bought them, and into an arid olive grove to discover Dali's debris Christ. A gigantic figure lying on its back, arms outstretched as though crucified. Its ribcage an old fisherman's, its curling pain-racked fingers hacked from car tires. "Let me photograph you with my Christ," said Dali. "And yes, of course," said I. "There, in the left armpit." I obey. No, not standing, curled up as though asleep. Wearing my only decent trousers, I demurred. "Take them off," he said. "Naked. It will make a better photograph." And what the hell, I thought, a little drunk, bemused, and I admit, profoundly awed. Lie down, he ordered, and lie down I did, with grit and rubble biting into my skin, as, responding to more commands, I turned this way and that, in fetal positions, and listened to the clicking camera. Now, masturbate. And what the hell, I thought again, but did, wondering where all this might lead. Starting from scratch, and in so unerotic a situation, this took some time. Dali still clicking the camera and fumbling in his trousers. When I'd done, I had to brush grit from my skin, grimly thinking that masturbation can be remarkably unrewarding and mechanical. Sheepish and in silence, we went back to Carla, who was still sitting in her egg.
There's no way to bring stuff down there. It was a very bad place.
We would get down on our beds and start to crawl.
The thing you need to look for is something that you can dive underneath and you're going to be somewhat protected.
That place became the place where my brother was, and I wanted to find him and bring him home.
When you'd enter into a location, it looked as it did on September 10th.
It meant the world to me that I could bring him and lay him to rest.
9/11, Ground Zero Underworld, Tuesday at 9 on 4.
Introduce Glade Light and Scent, a new kind of air freshener. Its continuous all-day fragrance helps you escape the outside world. And when you need to escape from the inside world, it glows with changing-colored lights that help you slow down and unwind. Welcoming fragrance and relaxing colors. New Glade Light and Scent. S. Johnson Family Company.
Hurry in store. Thousands of bags of money are waiting to be won. You could win up to £100.
Petrol at Tesco. Spend £50 at the tills and we'll give you 5p off every litre at the pumps. Fair enough, really. You help us keep going, so we help you keep going. Tesco. Every little helps.
The Games of 2012 are awarded to the city of London.
Is Britain being burnt by the Olympic flame? Dispatches investigate the Olympics cash machine this Monday at 8 on 4.
Bonjour. Good morning.
Gala, who had warmed to me a little over dinner, asked me to return to Portlaoise the following evening. I went to the house, as asked, and so did 20 others. The Cadillac had swept into town, and gathered the hippie flotsam of the night. It was the weekend, and there was plenty of it. Most of the boys were taken off to see the olive grove. I stayed with Gala. They were away far longer than I had been, and the terrace was in darkness when they returned in dribs and drabs. By the time I knew Dali, he claimed almost daily to be impotent, and yet there was the daily fumbling in his trousers by his Christ, and the not infrequent invitation to young women to withdraw in some other part of the garden and watch him masturbate. He preferred to watch men, and to be watched by women. If there was ever film in his camera at these times, which now I doubt, but I think it was camouflage for a voyeur who, though brazenly addicted to the habit, was still at his age both embarrassed by residual shame and still unwilling to admit to homosexuality. Then in his archive there must have been thousands of photographs of unidentified young men in much the same situation as he put me. Which of them, I wondered, had been in which armpit, which had masturbated for him, and which perhaps had done for Dali what Florentine boys had done for the last of the Medici, and buggered each other for his delight. I doubt if he ever touched semen, and I knew that he would not touch blood, though he could watch it flow with pleasure from a wounded bull at bullfights. The perfect combination of blood and homoerotic beauty. I once saw Dali paralyzed by the sight of blood. We were wandering on a deserted shore when a boy emerged from the sea. Dali's slim-hipped, brown-skinned ideal, 20 or so. And if that were not enough, he was bleeding heavily from one foot. The cut was deep across the sole, the pumping loss of blood considerable. It was then that I saw Dali utterly still, just staring. Staring was the one thing that he did more intently even than masturbation, and often they were the same thing, for he claimed that he could ejaculate merely by looking. Bloody man coming in his trousers again, I thought, and shouted at him. This was no occasion for addressing him as Majesty. Breaking into his trance, took every word of abuse that I could muster, every obscenity. But at last I could offer him the choice of holding the foot and getting blood on his fine linen trousers, or running for help. He chose to trot off with a little more urgency than his customary shuffle. I have seen men paralyzed with fright, but never before or since have I seen a man rendered insensible by sheer aesthetic pleasure. When Dali integrated his preoccupations into his great canvases, the shock and horror provoked may to this day disturb the viewer. Perhaps the most important thing that Dali did, apart from becoming the supreme surrealist, was to confront the taboo that made masturbation quite unmentionable. In 1929, to call a painting the Great Masturbator was to provoke outrage. Self-abuse, then, was widely recognized as impure. Psychiatrists advised anxious parents to tie their sons' hands to their bedsteads. A boy who masturbated would go blind, become so enfeebled that he might not reach adulthood. Dali would have none of this. That same year in Paris, wild with excitement at having been embraced by the surrealists, he wrote a vivid account of watching himself masturbate in the mirror of his hotel bedroom. Immature Dali left this experience till he was 25. A rhythmic and solitary sacrifice, he wrote, prolonged for 15 minutes before wrenching out the ultimate pleasure with all the animal force of my clenched hand. With his own philosophy of desire, Dali broke surrealism's intellectual bonds, and with the insights of his unconscious mind played Pied Piper to all the other members. Pornography, fetish, and sexual diversion without guilt became the gospel of surrealism. The movement was released from repressive morals and mannerly conventions, from self-control and censorship, and became a thing of pain, punishment, and bondage, of phallus, fellatio, and gaping vagina, of sodomy and sadism. Dali was fascinated by the idea of sodomy. He knew how it was done, and he believed that a harder erection was required. His penis was small, and Crowley mocked for it at school. He was embarrassed by it as an adult. He was, moreover, subject all his life to premature ejaculation. As the recipient, he He had found sodomy impossible, he claimed. His friend in early manhood, probably the only true friend in his life, the poet and playwright Federico Garcia Lorca, Dali's twin soul, dazzling physically and intellectually, attempted it in 1925. Lorca tried twice to get Dali and failed. Or so for years Dali maintained, asserting that he himself was not and had not been homosexual. 40 years on, and less guarded about it in the relaxed atmosphere of the late 1960s, Dali felt able to admit that pain, rather than the absence of desire, had been the deterrent. If it hurt, then Lorca had at the very least begun to penetrate him, and Dali admitted this to me. I observed that as some assholes are tight enough to make emptying the bowels almost impossible, proper medical remedies had been devised, and the following year took him the very instrument, gift-wrapped, as it were, from John Bell and Croydon in Wigmore Street, an anal dilator. He chuckled over it, and then showed me a hall full of rubber phalluses, a sorry little band of working tools employed by one boy and another in the more exciting preliminaries in the armpits of the debris Christ. Did he use them on himself? Who knows? He had such a phobia about being casually touched that intimate sexual touching by anyone other than himself had become impossible, and anal masturbation with a dildo may well have been all that he had left, if he were indeed impotent by then.
Who is that?
No, this is only one man carry one crutch for one flag, you know, this is one.
Right. You like crutches a lot?
Yes, because it's one symbol of impotency. Only the great people realize sensational as heaven is impotent, you know.
The lifelong trouble with Dali is that so much was fantasy and so little the whole unvarnished truth. Dali proclaimed that his art grew from a hallucinatory energy, and he was compelled to paint like a madman. Many witnesses have written of the passion with which Dali worked, rising early, remaining seated at his easel until the light of evening failed, the ideas flowing consciously and unconsciously, the cap of Athena, goddess of wisdom, always on his head, documenting the functions of his conscious mind and, again using his own words, completely discrediting the world of reality. At 25, in Paris, Dali's imagination burst into its fleur du mal, as astonishingly stimulated by surrealism, as Raphael's had been in Rome 4 centuries before, lifted from the banal to the beastly and the beautiful. Through the late 1920s to the mid-1930s, Dali led us into his private desert, a haunted, rock-strewn place of stricken incubi and nightmare fictions of exquisitely unpleasant sensibility. His persistent capacity to disconcert unrivaled. Dali believed that through the obsessive contemplation of objects, he could enter another plane of consciousness. By painting them, his subconscious was liberated and the object itself freed from conventional association. This is visionary experience, psychological derangement, deliberately falsified memory. In the ingenious conjunction of unlikely objects, the acceptable qualities of one he transferred to the other and made them unacceptable, transmuting from flesh to fantasy, animal to human, with putrefaction, corruption, and confusing genital illusion distorted in the infinite space of dreams.
In the Dalian conception, one artist is one strange character.
There is every indication that Dali disliked, even feared, the genitals of women, and harboured some primeval distaste for menstrual bleeding. Had he discovered the ladyboys of Southeast Asia, he might well have been in his element. For to him the ideal body and the ideal state were those of the hermaphrodite, able in every way possible to be simultaneously hetero and homosexual. It was a fantasy. I asked him if he had ever encountered an hermaphrodite, and he had not. But dream of them he did.
Non completely masculine, non completely feminine, androgyne.
Dali introduced the world to the Freudian pleasures of ravenous sexual appetite and the equal pleasures of revulsion. Excrement fascinated him. This interest was perhaps the one lasting stimulus to his imagination engendered by his hated father. For this feared monster of a man had once returned home and unashamedly announced that he had crapped in his trousers. Dali, 10 or 12 at the time, was lastingly humiliated and ashamed. Feces became so much his open obsession that by the time Dali reached Paris, the established surrealists suspected him of eating shit. "Are you coprophage?" they quizzed him. He was not, but in asking, the surrealists succeeded in expanding his preoccupation. When I knew him, Dali examined his stools for form and consistency, and admitted to a profound sense of loss when flushing them away. He was, however, fastidious to the point of squeamishness. Not for one moment would he have touched a stool, let alone eaten it. His canvases of the late 1920s and early 1930s are among the finest paintings of the 20th century. In his high colour, immaculate draftsmanship, and transparent, insubstantial glazes, his skills were far closer to the painters of the High Renaissance than to any painter of his day. To hang his paintings with theirs might resolve the riddles of his palette, the pigments and the oils he used, his perspective and his light. But just as Dali was getting into his stride, the door shut on his development.
For the last 10 years, Channel 4 has followed the lives of 6 remarkable children, all born with a disability. Now they begin to understand what it means to be different from their friends.
I'm special.
Put your tongue in, please. No. He's just a kid to get on with his life, like everyone else. I just want my little girl to feel right.
We're very okay to have our little family. It's just slightly different.
Their personal journeys continue.
It's blooming hard, but you're worth it. She was the making of me.
Born to be Different, Thursday at 9 on 4.
Keeping an eye on your weight?
Why make life complicated?
Bite-sized shredded wheat.
Say here, 100% whole grain wheat. That's all that's in it.
Just one ingredient.
No added salt
or added sugar.
Nothing else in there.
Very good for keeping an eye on your weight.
It's great for watching what I'm eating. Easy.
I work because I care. Whatever you're working for, let Monster find the right for you. Search and apply for jobs online.
I think we have to confront this.
I've got no idea what you're on about.
Are you insane?
Straighten, guys.
I don't want to talk about it on camera.
I'm gonna have a rough day.
That's it.
Go on then, you better hit me with it.
Ready? Gorgeous.
Oh my God.
Is it true? Wow.
Duh. Really?
Absolute classic.
Really? I knew that.
Trust me, this is going to work.
Jump, chick, hold now. Channel 4's launching a new +1. So what does that mean? It means you can find the exact same channel you know and love just 1 hour later on digital.
Absolutely fabulous.
How's that for convenience? The brand new Channel 4 +1 service, now available on Freeview, Sky and Virgin Media.
By the time I knew him, Dali could not, he swore, swim in the sea in Caracas unless accompanied by the solitary ghost of Vermeer, or, if the merriment of the occasion called for it, 100 philosophers breaststroking in time to the melodies of Rossini's William Tell. We occasionally walked a little on the beach, but Dali's steps were the sandal-dragging slither of an aged Japanese. He must once have been careless and lithe enough to clamber these uncomfortable rocks with ease, but not in my day. The beach always had an astonishing effect on him, as though he had never seen it before. I was at first dismayed by this Alzheimer effect, but I think that he was invariably overwhelmed by so dense a rush of memories that he could not speak. Any other man would have given me a time and place to childhood recollections, and have said that here he saw a woman empty her bladder, that there Lorca had first buggered him, and on that rock Gala in his arms had talked of death. But Dali kept these things to himself. In Caracas, Dali had been a local boy. He was a spoiled, precocious, domineering and objectionable brat, loving his doting mother, who died when he was 16, hating his bullying father, who lived on until 1950. Dali was prey to preposterous daydreams, a miniature Napoleon too immature to comprehend the blushing, shame and anguish induced by physical experience and the undefined sexual fantasies of childhood. I once suggested walking back from the beach to the house in a straight line, perhaps a kilometre or so, instead of following the track. Taking no account of his flimsy sandals, off we set. But however much he thought that he belonged to that wild landscape, he knew nothing of it, and was at once helpless among the thorny shrubs that tore his trousers. Like a child, he had a tearful tantrum, and we returned to the track, he in a furious sulk, me in disgrace.
Yeah! 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 Yeah!
As an adolescent student, he was at first retiring, but masked his shyness by becoming a dandy, a poseur. As he himself put it, he became an actor on the path of fame and deceit.
In this moment, in Dalinian English.
The Dali I knew spoke English with perfect ease, often with a dramatic sense of interval and emphasis, but sometimes in public he spoke very slowly and affected a heavy Spanish accent, elaborating diphthongs into syllables.
Only see somebody catch a little piece of my speech. This is absolutely sufficient.
In spite of 8 continuous years in the United States, his Americanisms were very few. When at the outbreak of World War II he fled to America with Gala, it was the perfect society in which he could be fully, wholeheartedly, and irredeemably the poseur and the dandy, gulling new money from the newly rich in a burgeoning economy that was a glossy, glitzy, vulgar creature of the cinema age. In New York, he could be the imperious aristocrat, and Dali, boastful, unprincipled, greedy and extravagant, was the first artist to become a gossip column celebrity, the Andy Warhol of his day. He became the buffoon whose antics amused America and made him a millionaire, but whose slick portraits of society women and sleazy dreamscapes, tainted with soft pornography and Disney imagery, ruined his reputation as a painter. In America, Gala, his wife, come mistress, muse, was essentially Dali's agent too, determining to what commercial products he should lend his name. Perfumes, cosmetics, hosiery and ties, ballets, films, and flamenco shows. Fixing his prices and acting as argumentative intermediary between the painter and the art world. No other agent was ever loathed as heartily by those with whom she had to deal.
Je suis fou du chocolat l'envers.
By the time of their return from America in 1948, Dali was virtually exhausted as a serious painter, his imagery degraded by self-cannibalism, his European reputation now contemptible.
Salvador Dali is very rich, and Dali loves tremendously money and gold. And Dali sleep the best after one day of war, receive one tremendous quantity of checks with dollars of any kind of golden symbols, and sleep absolutely divine.
Why did he return to Portland? The explanation, simple and romantic, is at odds with the swashbuckling Dali of New York. It is that in the Big Apple he was, as he put it, camping out. True, in more ways than he meant it. But in Portland he was at home.
Greetings.
There he had only fishermen for company, no rich patrons, no mountebanks and misfits, no boys dropping their trousers, yet. And for a year or two he was content to paint Gala as pagan goddess and Madonna. I did not, in any sense, know Gala. She was there in Caracas and Portland in the late 60s and early 70s, but seemed to have retired within herself and was deaf enough to sit in silent witness of our conversations, utterly withdrawing from them. She still swam below the house, her figure trim enough to wear the scant French bikinis of the period, yellow her favourite colour against her tanned dark skin that was as rough to the touch as any russet apple. Standing at the sea's edge, silhouetted against the morning light, her most remarkable feature was the gap between her inner thighs, her pelvis far wider than any of the slim boys whose buttocks Dali thought so beautiful. Did Gala and Dali ever have the straightforward sex life of a married couple? I doubt it. Gala had once been strikingly good-looking. When Dali and she met in 1929, he, in heterosexual terms, was still a virgin, terrified of the vagina. She, on the other hand, was described by Paul Éluard, her Parisian poet husband and a man from whom no orifice was safe, as the most intense incarnation of love, desire, and erotic pleasure. He aroused in her a nymphomania that even he could not assuage alone. Gala did not immediately take Dali as a lover, but she nevertheless bewitched him and ditched Elua, becoming Dali's wife and manager. Can she really have gathered on his liberty, becoming the flame to which a myriad moths might be attracted, so that she could take her pick? I believe that was certainly an element of what happened and went on happening. And there must have been hundreds of young men who briefly led into Gala and masturbated for Dali, thousands even, wondering which they might please more and from whom they might milk something of a fortune, only to find themselves milked for a day or two, then utterly discarded. But for Gala, in 1929, it was a hell of a gamble. Was Gala remarkably more prescient than all the states put together in recognizing Dali's oncoming superiority?
Sobre todo el convencimiento que tengo ahora, gracias a ella, de que no soy tan mediocre como yo creía. Porque ella creyó enseguida que tenía un gran talento. Y yo al contrario creí.
Of all Dali's post-war work, only the Christ of St. John of the Cross of 1951 has some intellectual and emotional integrity. It is surrealism, mystical and spiritual. I must argue that in Dali's hands, surrealism was, in its free-flowing thought and poetic imagery, no matter how secular and sordid, the profane and sexual equivalent of the contemplations of the greatest Spanish saints. Substitute Dali's masturbation, its ranging fancies, its orgasm, the little death, for the visionary mysticism and ecstasies of saints, and we have an inkling of the intensity with which Dali's imagination was released and charged. This was Dali's last great painting, and the last religious painting by any painter, anywhere. Had Dali stayed in America, it would never have been executed. And after it, the deluge.
They say President Bush likes to take it easy.
You don't have to be in Washington to work.
And whether he's in the office or on vacation, it's fair to say he's a pretty relaxed kind of guy.
Now watch this drive.
That's not to say he hasn't been busy.
I'm a war president. Anybody say nice shot? Nice shot. Hell of a shot.
There's more to come from George W.
I'm a...
Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11, Monday at 9 on 4.
It's amazing how many stains kids get. It's impossible to keep their whites white. They're often only fit for the bin.
All you need is one tube of new Vanish Oxy Action Crystal White in every wash. There's no need to throw that out now. Let me show you what it's doing in your machine. It can remove all these tough stains. Make sure it's crystal white.
For shirts, socks, bedding and towels.
Ooh.
New Vanish Oxy Action Crystal White. Laundry product of the year 2007.
She don't run. Anymore.
drama about the tragedy at Morecambe Bay. Ghosts, Thursday at 10 on 4.
Not once did I see Dali pick up a brush or even attempt to draw. By 1968, his rate of production had been cut back to almost nothing, and he entered the leanest part of his life. He seemed to have no inclination, and in the successive summers that I was allowed into his studio, he displayed the same unfinished canvas on his easel, with not an added touch, his brushes ordered and unused, no oil, no turpentine, no varnish, perfuming the air. To a stranger, it might have seemed that Dali had just left the room, but to a man accustomed to seeing painters at work, this studio was a hygienic monument to inactivity. It was as though his mind had emptied. Fully clothed, he sat in the sun like an old lizard, dozing. Why did I stop seeing Dali? Well, after 4 visits to Caracas, I felt that we had exchanged as much as we could, and that the friendship, if that is what it was, had run into the sands. By the time I knew him, Dali's was an empty life. He was now the millionaire painter, the bon vivant painter, a celebrity painter, on whom a myriad nobodies could sponge. He, poor soul, could not see that his intellectual life was at an end. By then, conversation and performance were the only art forms left to him, and others were expected to play their parts. I had come to realize that Dali, for all the fawning interest of strangers, was alone and could not bear his loneliness. Gala, his anchor in Caracas since 1930, was not enough. He could not, in his dotage, live without a daily dose of hero worship. Dali and Gala fell into the worst trap of the long marriage. The mutual tolerance of the one for the other's sexual habits eventually drove them apart, and their, for a long time, evident companionship fell into habit, nourished by nothing, increasingly repetitive and stale. Even together they were alone, and they no longer talked.
Dali is the maximum personality of exhibitionism.
In the world?
In the world. And Gala less. Because you imagine, si Gala is the same exhibitionist as me, never work. And Gala, the day that Dali decide, give Tiscaster, only one condition. You never coming in Tiscaster to see me, only with written invitation.
From your wife?
And Dali is every day more masochist and love tremendously this condition.
Gala had infatuations with far younger men that cost tens of thousands of dollars to initiate and maintain. By far the larger part of Dali's later working life was spent irreversibly on the downward path of corruption, spiritual and financial, necessary to satisfy Gala's greed, avarice, and generosity to those lovers who could close their eyes and satisfy her undiminished nymphomania. When I last saw her, she was on the point of quite sharp physical decline. She tottered unevenly, her head thrust forward, and her, I think, naturally mousy brown hair had thinned so much that she had taken a black wig bound in a preposterous black bow. Gala worried about money, as many aging people do. Yet all the best pictures had gone. Gala had sold them herself, some for a pittance, and even given a few of Dali's masterpieces to her lovers. She knew of Dali's trembling hand. of the fading imagery of his imagination, how little work he did, and she could see that, though she was 10 years older, he might die first. This fear drove her into the corrupt business of his last years. The genuine signatures on paintings not even conceived by him, the genuine signatures on forgeries that she had, unknown to Dali, commissioned from imitators, the genuine signatures on blank sheets of paper on which fake prints would appear. Such was the extent of this corruption that any Dali work after 1960, even with a specific guarantee of authorship, must be the subject of some skepticism. In 1982, Gala broke her thigh, not the first fragile bone to snap. When in June Dali found her dead in her bed at Portland, it was as well the end for him, though he had 7 years of abject misery ahead. Fate could have been kinder and sent him first to his grave, could have sent him sooner after her. Though I think at the end he hated her, and they had fought like cat and dog, he could not easily live without her. In the castle at Poubol, he retired to her bed, and in increasingly fractious depression, made life intolerable for those who looked after him. It was they who ignored the alarm bell when, in 1984, he set fire to the bed.
Emerging dramatically from 2 years of seclusion in his castle 3 weeks ago, Salvador Dali was a pathetic sight, badly burnt after a fire in his bedroom, a sick recluse suffering severe malnutrition.
His last years were spent in the Torre Galatea, part of the medieval fortifications of Figueras, next to Dali's theatre museum. There he starved, obstinately refusing solid food, taking liquids by a tube through his nose.
Viva España! Catalonia!
No years with Gala can have been more miserable than those he spent without her. In January 1989, in the local hospital, he died. When great retrospective exhibitions seemed to sanitize the man and his imagination, to suggest that he could do no wrong, to counter the critical dismissal that had been the informed view of him for years, I wanted to shout that I knew another Dali, a dirty Dali, so to speak, a Dali who had always since a boy had a filthier imagination than any army sergeant humiliating raw recruits. I wanted to tell of his hundreds of obscene drawings, a lifetime of them squirreled away in Portland, the early ones so delicate, the late so amatorial and crude. I wrote the necessary note when Gala died, but when Dali followed her, and I'm certain that he thought of it as following, for he had followed her every day since their first meeting, there was no one to whom I could express my grief, except myself. And I did genuinely grieve. Now, all these years later, I realize that despite the obscenity, the corruption, and the hostile critics, the public had been right, and is right still. Dali deserves his reputation as the last of the great old